Today I wanted to do something a little bit different, and that is talk about water mechanics in the game. More precisely, the purpose would be to create passive spawners, which is spawners like you see in the background at the moment, focusing on spawning mobs without relying on mob spawners in the game, and actually making those efficient. So I will start talking a little bit about basic mechanics to begin with, and then expand upon it to include different designs and a couple of personal favorites. So let's get started, shall we? First off, I wanted to talk about basic spawn mechanics. Most of the hostile mobs that you see in the game require just a single block to spawn on, just like this, the pink glass showing where the mob would spawn, and it also requires a certain height, so that makes them very easy to handle. However, spiders are a little bit different. They require any block surface to spawn on. They cannot spawn in the air next to it here, but they can spawn on the edge or further inside. But in order to spawn, even though the spider is 2 by 2 by 1, it actually requires a space of 3 by 3 by 2 in order to be able to spawn in that place. That is a very important thing to remember, because that means that you can either selectively spawn spiders or not. Any hostile mob in the game will spawn depending on light level. Some of the bigger light sources, the biggest, are light level from the sun, which in a vertical line from the sky to any block that has opening to the sky will have a value of 15, and then drop by one block or one light level each block that it passes under a ceiling. Any other light source like glowstone, pumpkin light lanterns, stuff like that, is a light level of 15 on the block itself, and then has the same pattern as a torch going from the blocks beside it, namely starting at light level 14 and decreasing by one light level every block until it reaches light level 7, where hostile mobs are able to spawn. Any lower level than that, and the mobs will spawn more efficiently, so generally you want your spawners to be as dark as possible. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about here was basic pathfinding, and I've laid out a diamond shape here because that is a certain distance that you can travel in the game for any mob. Take a mob that is standing in the middle at the place of the pink glass. Now, you'd see any block on this platform, of course, would be a legal pathfinding point, so it would be able to move to those points. Now, there is something a little bit funny in the game, namely that mobs will recognize trapdoors as a walkable block, so these actually become bridges. By that extension, of course, since we have a bridge over this gap, mobs will see these and these as walkable spaces. However, this area down here is not. And the important thing to remember about this pattern is, when a mob is standing in the middle here and is finding a place to walk, you might notice that this platform is the biggest, so the mob will have the highest chance to walk to any point on this platform. However, it will have a chance of dropping off over any of the trapdoors, which is equal to the number of tiles on the platform on the opposite side of the trapdoor, divided by the total. So, by using these mechanics, we can make spawners more efficiently, because if we use the trapdoors to make these bridges, we can coax the mobs into having a higher chance of walking off by simply making other likable pathfinding blocks. Now, mobs has a tendency to walk off ledges. We're not counting here on mobs who are actually following a player, because most spawners will not have aggressive behavior towards a player at the time of spawning. So we're talking about default mechanics. And in this case, mobs will generally not like to walk off ledges that will lead to damage. Additionally, mobs are more likely to walk off smaller ledges. So a mob will be most likely to walk off in the far left side here, because there's only one block down. The problem is that mobs could just walk up again, so we could go further down, but once we pass the 3-block height, mobs will start to take fall damage. So at this point, mobs will no longer go off. Now, here comes in the little trick. If we trick them with a trapdoor, we can have mobs walk off the edge and fall off, even though they would take damage, as though there were no drop at all. That is a very good little trick that we need to remember. Now that we have the basics of spawning and pathfinding down, the next thing I wanted to talk about is dry drop spawners, or what I call dry drop spawners. And if we look above, I made a few platforms here. The first and most basic one is just a normal dry drop spawner. You have some spawning platforms, you have some trapdoors. Now, you will note that the way that it's laid out here, you have a 3-high platform. The purpose of this is, since most hostile mobs are 2 blocks high, once they walk off the platform, it needs to be at least 2 high for them not to walk back on. But in order to avoid them getting stuck in gaps by pushing each other, we are placing the trapdoors 1 block higher up. Additionally, over here at the point of drop, the hole has been made a little bit larger, because if you only have a single block hole and using trapdoors, the mobs will simply be able to walk on the trapdoor and walk into the other direction. It will likely never walk off. Now, you might notice I have put a half slab in the middle of the platforms, and that is for the purpose of preventing spider spawns, because generally in a spawner you don't want spiders to spawn, because they are quite difficult to manage and are very likely to clog up the system. Now the problem is, mobs aren't very likely to walk off here. If we spawn some mobs in, you will notice that the mobs are generally not very likely to go off edges. They will walk off the platforms in a little bit, but once they get down, they'll just generally wander around down here, and the reason for that is really that the chance of walking in these areas is just so much larger. So we could increase the chance of them walking further down by making a funnel system. So if we have mobs spawned in the same way, they will fall down on a ledge there, as you see that guy just did, and eventually he will walk further down, but he will not be able to return up, reducing the chance of them walking backwards and generally pushing them towards the edge. Now, this is still very slow, and there is a very important thing to remember when doing mob spawners, and that is, after spawning they have a little bit of a period to walk around, after which they will stop moving entirely, and if they're far enough away from the player, they will just despawn. So this makes these dried up spawners very little, or very lacking on the efficiency side, because you have to be close to them, so close that mobs won't stop moving, or they won't despawn, and that's generally just not what you want in a spawner. So we're going to look into a bit of a better design. Now the problem becomes, how do we actually improve the efficiency of the dry drop spawner? Well, one way to do that would be to introduce water into the system, because water is actually able to push mobs along. Now, a couple of things here is important to remember, namely, from where you pour your water source, it will be able to extend a total of 8 blocks, after which it will simply die out. Another thing to remember is the way that it spreads. Water spreads towards any edge that is closest. So if I pour it in the middle here, you will see it pouring towards 3 corners or 3 edges. But also a very important point here is, since the water is able to pour in all 4 directions, the water in the middle here is actually still and will not push mobs. However, if we instead pour on this block here, you will see it only pouring towards the closest edge. However, the stream, since it's pouring in 2 directions, will go diagonally. We can use these mechanics also to manipulate the stream into flowing in only 1 direction, or alternatively in 2 directions. Now, there is a problem, because when we make a stream like this, what do we actually do when we get to the end of it? Because a mob will simply come to a stop and we can't simply continue the stream, because if we put another water source here, the water will flow backwards and we will get clogging by the water pushing in 2 different directions in the middle. So one way to do this is we could put a sign after the stream, so we could continue it with another stream afterwards. Now the only problem in this case is that this isn't very efficient. I do want to note also that these could be 8 block streams or shorter. It's really up to you. It doesn't matter in efficiency's sake. The problem here is that when a mob comes in here, it will generally get stuck in every gap and wait there until another mob comes along and pushes it further. So generally not the best design, so we need to find out a way to continue the stream. One way to do that is to use the same sign trick. In this case we have put a sign at the end of the stream going right here, and then one above, so that we can continue the stream above and thus extend it. So if we try putting a mob into this system, you will see that it continues without any gaps all the way to the end. Do note that if you don't have the roof above here, mobs could jump out onto the edge here if they're fast enough, so you might want to use these inside a tunnel, or at least make sure that the walls are high enough. The only problem with this sort of arrangement is that mobs like zombies, for instance, are able to spawn as babies. And babies are smaller than other zombies and can get stuck inside these holes, which will make it into a bomb stream pretty much. So how do we avoid this? Well, one thing we could do is introduce stairs. Replacing the lower sign with a stair, we can have the stream extend this way. However, we need to raise the roof up a little bit, because if we don't, all the tall mobs would suddenly get stuck here. So if we try putting in mobs again, you'll see that they continue along the stream as they did before. They might get a little bit of a halt on the stairs, but it's not very much. However, since babies are about 1 block in size, they will not get stuck in the stair and will be able to continue along. The question is if we can get a baby out of this to actually demonstrate it. There we are. So the baby can simply pass along the stair and will get caught by the stream and continued on. Now there is another way to do this. Instead of going up, we could also go down. By doing that, we have a stream going right, which is cut off by a sign. Do note that if you actually make a full 8 block stream, you do not need this sign, but just for the sake of this tutorial, I will put it there to make it dynamic. It won't hurt in either case. So another stream at the bottom, which is pushing them further right till they hit a stair. There is then a sign above that stream and a stream above the stair going right to continue it. This is really one of my favorite designs compared to the others because it's a little easier to see what is going on. And it has the same benefit that not even babies will get stuck in it. They will simply pass along until the end. Now, next up is water flow patterns. Water can flow a total of 8 blocks, and it has a certain strength at each level. So, if we look at this, you'll see the water is reaching the joint here and flowing in 2 directions, but we would really like mobs to be pushed from both of these trenches into this one. So how do we actually do that? Well, if we put water at a point where the strength is sufficient to overpower this strength of the intersection, it will be able to push mobs along. You will notice that it is going diagonally down to the left where I'm facing now, which means that mobs are being pushed in the correct direction. You can also step into the water if you are in doubt, and it will push along like you were a mob. Now, this can be a little fishy to work around, because different distances can actually yield the same result. But the important thing is to watch where the streams are moving. Like you can see, this one is going left and it's not sufficient to overpower the stream going what is called horizontal, but it still has the same function of passing us along this right path. Now, if we do anything beyond this, you see the stream gets so weak that we actually get still water here, or we get a backflow. So that is not what we want. Additionally, if we pour it too close, the water here becomes still and this stream becomes dead. So it's all a matter of where you put your streams, and do make sure that you watch which directions the water is flowing, or test it out yourself. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is anti-bumping drops, because if you're pushing mobs along a water stream into another one, they will generally jump around and can become troublesome by bumping the mobs above it. So generally the safe distance to drop them is 3 blocks, so that they don't bump the mobs coming down the stream and thus clog it up. So just to show it off here, you see the zombie passing along, and he is not able to jump high enough to actually jump up and disturb other mobs. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is channeling strategies, something which has many different looks and many different functionalities, and can also be applied to a normal spawner. So one of the things that you see often is the center drop, but the problem with this sort of strategy is that a single mob going in will find its way pretty quickly. But if you have a lot of mobs, they will start bumping each other and preventing each other from going in. They will probably eventually get there, but it will take a long time for them all to go through. So in order to improve this, well, we could reduce some of the sides that mobs go in from. The only issue here is we still have the bumping problem. If there's too many mobs, they will simply start bumping each other against the wall and take a long time to go in. So the best method to get mobs to actually move along is to make sure that they cannot bump each other other than towards the point that you want to go, namely by reducing the amount of sides to 1. Do note here that the wall here does make a little bit of a problem for this one with the stairs, but mobs will come in from the side as well to push them, or push them further along here, and that will solve the problem for still a pretty high efficiency. But the reason I wanted to show this particular design is that it is very good for spiders, because spiders has a peculiarity where they are especially good at fighting water streams, but not when they are submerged in water. So you can actually make this very good against spiders by making sure that they will be submerged in water at all times. Lastly, my favorite design for most spawners other than spiders, and that is a simple sideways stream going into a drop with another stream leading them to one corner. This design is very high efficiency and very good at passing mobs along, and generally avoids clogging almost entirely. The only clogging you will see is towards the end of the system, depending on how efficient your next receiver is. Now that we have talked about all that, it is time to finally make a wet drop spawner. There is different methods, but one of the designs that I really like is this one, coined by Ether, which is based on the same pattern that you saw with the dry drop spawners. I wanted to point out here that this is only a quarter of the spawner. You are usually duplicating it on either side and in the opposing corner, but each stream is only 1 block wide. Now do note in this case that mobs are pretty quick to walk off, and that's because there's water below. With the water below you generally don't need the trapdoors because the mobs will tend to walk off pretty fast. There's only 8 blocks in the middle here where they can walk on, usually because you have a roof above, preventing this one from being used as a walkable spot. So a lot of the walkable space is below. Now there is other things you could do to make this a little more efficient. One problem here is that it is sacrificing a little bit of efficiency for making it more compact, which you could argue is either good or bad. But if you wanted to be more efficient, you could make the walls higher, and I set up a platform here. This is the pattern that you're using for both the dry drop spawner and the wet drop spawner. In the dry drop spawner you wouldn't have the necessity to put the blocks here at the end, but for the wet drop you do. So let's put in a couple of walls here. Like that. Now that we have done that, we're really ready to put in some platforms. The platforms goes on the iron blocks here, and a simple 3x3, 3 high, and let me just grab this so that we don't get spider spawns. Now, of course you don't need to make this solid, I just do it for the looks. And once you have finished putting in the last platform, you can cap it off, build the walls. And just to prevent mobs from trying to go to this point, we close off the walls above the diamond blocks here, which is where the water sources are going to go. Now you will notice that the water extends all the way to the end here. That is because the distance is exactly 8 blocks, and it is made in this way so that it will flow diagonally in the corners as well, and it makes it very easy and only a very few source blocks in order to cover the entire area. Now with all that done, the only thing we really need is a trapdoor. So if we go over here and fetch one, there we are, we can put in the last bit and test it out. Oops. It doesn't matter which side the trapdoor goes on. In most cases, the only thing is the trapdoor does provide a little bit of a walking ledge, so put them so that they cannot use them to walk onto another edge. For instance, if you put the trapdoor here, it would still work, but they could walk to the other platform, so you don't want to do that. Now that that is in, they will see these as bridges to the other platform, which will make any block on this platform a walkable space for any mob on this platform. So that will make the chance of mobs walking off much higher than it was before, but it does sacrifice the benefit of having to have one block higher. So let's just close you in. It needs one block more space towards the ceiling, so you can have fewer layers available. There we are. A highly recommended design, and one that is stackable. You can put them above each other and just have mobs drop into a single point in the middle. The last thing I wanted to talk about is water elevators, because they all have their own benefits and their own downsides, and I'm not going to go too far into this, but just point out a few designs and give you a few pointers as to things to consider when you're designing your own, because if you do not, it is likely that you will end up with a water elevator that simply does not work. A very common design is this one right here, where you have alternating water source blocks and signs, which is a great design, probably one of the best, but only if you know that you will only be dealing with 1x1x2 mobs, because it will bring him to the top without any drowning damage whatsoever. However, it does not handle spiders, neither regular spiders or cave spiders, and it does not handle baby spiders. Normal spiders can be handled by making a diagonal pattern like this, changing from one side to the other using signs to stop them from forming full source blocks, and it will still make sure that they don't get any drowning damage. This will also work for 1x1x2 mobs, but it doesn't work necessarily for baby spiders or for baby zombies. It might still get them to the top, but only by bumping. To handle baby spiders and to handle zombies, one thing you could do is making a water column, a solid water column. The only problem is you might get drowning damage if you make it too long. So you need to maybe make it in stages in order to do this. But the most important thing for doing something like this is to remember that the column needs to be of solid water, because any non-source block will be a downwards water stream, which will suck them up downwards and make their trip up go very slow, thus increasing the chance of drowning damage. If you want to handle spiders, you could also make a stairway. Now these are pretty complex to build, and I'm not going to go into this in this tutorial, but just leave you with one thought, and that is, remember that spiders will have a trouble fighting streams only when they are submerged in water. So if you can make a spiral staircase or a regular staircase for the spiders, for the water elevator, then try to make it so that they are pushed down into the water as much as possible, because it will make them go up much faster than they would otherwise. This has been Aura, and I just wanted to say thank you for watching. I hope that it helped you a little bit, and if you do have any questions, do ask me and I'll see if I can help you out. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.